This is the story of the one. As a custodial supervisor at a high school, he knows that during cold and flu season, germs spread fast. It's why he partners with Grainger to stay fully stocked on the products and supplies he needs, from tissues to disinfectants to floor scrubbers. Also that he can help students, staff, and teachers stay healthy and focused. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Ruffman. I am your host, John Ruffman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going, and, as I like to point out each and every day, expands our base. I want to speak with you directly about a number of headlines that are profoundly disturbing. The President of the United States has decided to target Somalis who live in Minnesota. He did so because, as he says, I don't want them here. Now, it's an interesting question. Should a President of the United States be able to determine a policy dealing with immigration simply because I don't want them here? And let me be very clear. When he says, I don't want them in our country, their country is no good for a reason. It is, I believe, an irresponsible statement by a President of the United States. How do we react to that? How do we react when a President of the United States labels a whole people essentially unfit to live in the United States? And what gives a president the right to believe that and to implement something that clearly violates the law? That's right. The mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, pushed back. He said, and he was right, saying that about Somalis violates the moral fabric of what we stand for. He's right. And there should be a revulsion against what Donald Trump has said. I wanted to begin with that because when you label a whole people as essentially not being wanted because of who they are, there is something seriously wrong. Imagine if the President of the United States said that about Japanese or Chinese or Jews or Italians or Irish or, well, you name the group. There is something seriously wrong with this president. I want to say a word about what happened yesterday when Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, please, let's not call him the Secretary of War. There is no Department of War. There is a Department of Defense. And by the way, if I sound redundant, it is because I believe we need to emphasize that the whims of a president or the whims of a Secretary of Defense, well, they don't count. What counts in this country is the law. Hegseth cited the fog of war in the second strike, which took place, killing 2 individuals who we don't know anything about. He defended that follow-up strike, which at first was denied by the Defense Department. And remember, there is an allegation, no proof, that those who were taken out were drug-carrying individuals on boats in the Caribbean. During a cabinet meeting at the White House, and I listened to the entire cabinet meeting, which was not a cabinet meeting. I know what a cabinet meting is, and let me tell you what Donald Trump conducts. Well, they're certainly not cabinet meetings. Hegseth said he did not see any survivors in the water, saying the vessel, and I quote him directly, exploded in fire, smoke. You can't see anything. That is called the fog of war. It is? I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary. It's not a fog. There are films. It was filmed. The whole thing was filmed. And now you will be held accountable. But something else that Hegseth said that bothered me. He said he didn't stick around for the remainder of the September 2nd mission. No, he didn't. He was too busy. He had too much to do. And then they did do something, and I say the White House did this, that was absolutely fascinating. They've been trying to blame what happened on an admiral. And the gratuitous statement was made that the admiral had done exactly the right thing. There was no question about his ability. So who's responsible? Where does the buck stop? President Trump didn't know anything. He reminded me of Sergeant Schultz in Hogan's Heroes. I know nothing. Do you remember that line? Well, President Trump said he didn't know anything and that he still hasn't gotten a lot of information. Why? Because, as he said, I rely on Pete, meaning the Secretary of Defense. This is shocking for me, and I hope it is for you, because we trust the President and the Secretary of Defense to be people who really are in charge, and to blame Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley, well, that's unacceptable. Although they did say, well, he acted within his authority and the law when he ordered the second strike. And Hegseth said on social media that he stood by the admiral and I quote directly, and the combat decisions he made. We will be watching carefully as Admiral Bradley is expected to provide a classified briefing tomorrow. He's going to provide that briefing to lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans, who are charged with overseeing the military. There is, my friends, something wrong. Now, there is more to what is going on in the Pentagon, because we know that Hegseth has been a dysfunctional Secretary of Defense. And will there be accountability? The president has clearly tied himself directly to the Secretary of Defense. Again, I point out, not Secretary of War. I want to say a word about the cabinet meeting yesterday. If you read accounts of presidential administrations, if you study the American presidency, you know that cabinet officials were relied on for advice. Cabinet meetings were held behind closed doors because the president wanted to hear from his secretaries candidly, frankly. That's not what we're seeing now. Every time there is a cabinet meeting, the film is there, the cameras are there, and they are recording all of what is happening. This is unprecedented. Let me also point out that Hegseth sat next to President Trump at the cabinet meeting, and that he said that Trump has empowered commanders to do what is necessary, which is dark and difficult things in the dead of night on behalf of the American people. Let me explain to you that there are things that are dark and difficult, but they should never be decided in the dead of night. And ultimately, because this is the United States of America, things are revealed, and ultimately we will know the truth. The question is, who will be held accountable? Now, the other big story yesterday in the news was the failure of the talks on Ukraine. I want to be clear that appeasement doesn't work. 5 hours of talks with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, at the Kremlin, meeting with Vladimir Putin, among others. And let me be clear, did you see just 48 hours ago the images of Vladimir Putin in full military dress? Did you see that? This on the eve of the talks. Putin is accusing the Europeans of being responsible for the failure of these talks, that the Europeans are encouraging Ukraine to continue resistance. But what we know is that the Ukrainians are demanding that Russia withdraw from their territory. And it's interesting. I had a discussion just yesterday with one of our listeners who asked me, what was the Budapest Agreement? The Budapest Agreement was signed in 1995. It entailed the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and the then President of Russia. And the agreement was that if Ukraine gave up the third most significant nuclear arsenal in the world, that the West would guarantee Ukraine's security. What are we talking about now? We're talking about security guarantees. And let me be clear, unless we are prepared to go to war to protect Ukrainian sovereignty, there are no guarantees that work, because Putin will push the limits. Putin knows at this point he is winning. And who is afraid of his winning? Certainly the Ukrainians, and with good reason. Secondly, the Europeans themselves. Not just the Eastern Europeans, but the Western Europeans. Because there is a feeling that as Putin pursues his dream of reestablishing the Russian/Soviet Empire by bringing Ukraine back into the fold, that he will then have other territorial ambitions. In 1938, the Munich Agreement guaranteed the security of Czechoslovakia. And let me remind you, the Czechs were sold down the river. Let me also point out that Czechoslovakia was not present during the talks. And let me also point out that yesterday, as those meetings took place in the Kremlin, no one from Ukraine was present. It was the United States negotiating with Russia. And let me tell you, when you don't have all the parties seated around a table, well, nothing works. It's just that simple. I am deeply disturbed by what I am seeing. And let me point out that Vladimir Putin accused the Europeans. He was very direct. He says, the Europeans, don't have a peace agenda. They're on the side of the war. The war? Who started the war? Let me point out that at one point, President Trump accused Ukraine of starting a war against Russia. And this is, well, Putin's accusations appear to me to be his latest attempt to sow division, dissension between Trump and the European countries. His goal is to set the stage for exempting Moscow from blame for any lack of progress. And yet you and I know that it is Putin who is directly responsible. Remember, Russia started the war in 2022 with its full-scale invasion of a sovereign European country. And let me remind you that European countries have since spent billions of dollars to support Ukraine, financially, militarily. And what are we doing? What is the United States doing? We have an obligation here. I want to touch on one other point. You all know that the President of the United States granted a full and complete pardon to the former president of Honduras. I want everyone to understand something very clearly. The former president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, was a drug dealer. He was convicted in an American court He was arrested in 2022 at our request. And now Trump has granted him a full and complete pardon, a drug dealer. There is something seriously wrong here. And I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. I don't care if you're a supporter of Trump or not. What I do care about is that you examine each issue as I have. It is clear that something is rotten in Washington. And we better deal with it. And deal with it soon. The Supreme Court is going to have a big say in the powers of the president. And there will be midterm elections. And in those midterm elections, the American people have a chance to just say no to Donald John Trump. Well, that concludes what I have to say today. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can write me a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and click any of the links in the show notes to connect with me on social media. You can also email me directly, as many of you do. Please remember to share the episode with a friend or colleague so they can hear what we are talking about, bluntly, frankly, as we used to say, off the bark. And by so doing, we can continue to grow and expand, which is, of course, our goal. This show has been getting such positive attention that we're excited to bring on advertising support at the beginning and at the end of the program. This will help us to create more opportunities for Around the Political World. And we're happy that that's happening. And we hope you are too. Special thank you to Gogo Zoker, the wonderful producer of this podcast, who does such a great job every single day. I am John Rothman. I'll be back tomorrow with more of Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you then.
This is the story of the one. As a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing facility, he knows keeping the line up and running is a top priority. That's why he chooses Grainger. Because when a drive belt gets damaged, Grainger makes it easy to find the exact specs for the replacement product he needs. And next day delivery helps ensure he'll have everything in place and running like clockwork. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.